Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Also, thank you for your contributions to our discussions in the form of comments and reflections and insights and questions. I hope that you continue to do that so that we can all collectively learn together. We're going to be addressing the topic of two atoms, and we are looking at Adam in the book of Genesis. Some very odd dynamics have emerged related to Adam. Of course, they have been there this entire time. It's just a matter of how things are considered when we confront certain things. And so, this Adam narrative or these Adam narratives have been there for a while, and we're going to dive into one aspect of this narrative. Now, we've been talking about Adam before, but what we're seeing here is a little unique. Let's just put it that way. And so we're going to do a little deconstruction, a brief deconstruction. It's entirely too deep to do a deep dive. And so we're going to stay on the surface and we're going to deal with some very discrete dynamics related to Adam. And specifically, we are looking at two atoms. If anyone has additional insight related to this, please share that additional insight. And also, again, if you have resources that you are using, please provide the resource when you are referencing something so that we can all look at that resource and consider it, and again, continue to grow together. So let's delve into this very interesting issue. So what we're looking at are these two creation narratives. Now, many people will argue that there's only one creation narrative. And when you look at these creation narratives, surely you will see two creation narratives. And so it's hard to know whether individuals are honestly confused or if they are simply gaslighting because they need to, for whatever reason, hold on to this narrative about there being one narrative. But there are clearly two creation narratives. There are two atoms, at least, that are being created in terms of these narratives. And so we're going to look at exactly where these dynamics are taking place. Now, these two Adam narratives are profound. What is noted with respect to these two atoms is that there are two statuses for these two atoms. These are not the same entities based upon the narratives that have been provided. And so with one atom, we have one status. With the other atom, we have another status. And these entities also appear to be comprised of different things. Now, if you do a deconstruction of this and exegesis, you will also find these dynamics going on. And so the first atom appears to be an atom that is related to spirit. The second atom, however, appears to be an atom that is an outgrowth of excrement. No, we're not going to dwell on those two statuses at the moment. There are some other statuses that we will be looking at. The other dynamic that is noted with these two atoms is that one atom is presented as a master, one who has dominion, one who is to control and to subdue. The other atom is presented as one who is a servant, a slave, a worshiper, if you will, one who is subdued, a bondsman. What's also noted when you look at Genesis and these narratives, you see that there is something going on with respect to the younger Adam or the second Adam and the older Adam or the first Adam. First of all, as the narratives go on in Scripture, there is a dropping off of the older Adam. And so the initial Adam that is discussed in Genesis 1 is no longer discussed. The only entity discussed after this appears to be this younger Adam, this second Adam. And so there's a dynamic going on with younger versus older, last versus first. And also, there's an odd dynamic going on with respect to these atoms that present an issue that looks like male versus female. It is also very clear that the first and the second Adam are attached to or related to specific deities. Now, what's noteworthy is the first Adam is an outgrowth of Eloah, okay? Elohim, El, okay? So that's who or what the first Adam is attached to. Now, interestingly, there is a reference to this first deity with respect to the second deity, but there's the addition of another deity with respect to the second Adam. So the second Adam is presented with this deity known as Yahweh or Jehovah or Yehuda. And so the first Adam is this deity Eloah, Elah, okay? The second Adam is associated with Yahweh or Jehovah or Yehuda. Again, two Adams and two deities. Now, the Adams are also separated by chapters in the book of Genesis. And so we have the first Adam in the first Genesis. We have the second Adam in the second Genesis. And so we have the first origin and then the second origin, which is interesting in and of itself. And so again, in first Genesis, or Genesis 1, we have this first Adam or Adam. And so it might help to remember that El goes along with the first Adam or Adam. Now we're going to do a bit more contrasting with respect to these two Adams. So the first Adam, interestingly, is attached to the God code. Not only is the first Adam attached to the God code, but the reference to this Adam incorporates the God code. But of course, you can see aspects of these different God codes with respect to both El and with respect to Yahweh or Jehovah or Yehuda. And so the first Adam or Adam that is mentioned is specifically this Hey Adam. Now, Hey is that God code sound. And so you even see the God code symbol there. Now, with respect to this, we have not just Adam, but the Adam. And the is what elevates, if you will, this Adam to this deity sort of rank. And so with respect to Hey Adam, you have essentially God man, because you have that the. And remember, even in the Greek, you see the is related to this idea of deity. So interestingly, the Adam in the first Genesis, that first creation, is analogous to God and man. And so sort of a God man, the man, is the same as basically saying God man or deity man. And here's this important piece about the nature of the first Adam. And so the first Adam is associated with multiplying and filling the earth and subduing the earth and having dominion over everything related to the earth. Okay, and so that's that first Adam, that Hey Adam, that God man that is identified in or created in the first Genesis. And so this is the first Adam. So the first Adam is supposed to be an Adam or an Adam that is supposed to grow, proliferate, fill the earth, subdue the earth, and have dominion over the earth. And here you can see that word or that construct that goes along with the first Adam, this raw da. And again, with this raw da, you can see the God code at the end with the ah sound. And so it indicates here at 7287 that this construct is about ruling, having dominion, subduing, subjugating, treading down. And so this major idea of rulership or dominion. And here we have additional indicators. Again, to have dominion, also make to have dominion. And so you see that construct of make again. Also to reign, to subjugate, to rule over, to chastise. And so this is definitely an entity that is supposed to be over something, not an entity that is under something. And so that first Adam is essentially the first. That first Adam is that which is ruling or reigning over the earth. Now, what's odd about the second Genesis or the second Adam is that creation is over in terms of the narrative. The creation has stopped. On the seventh day, there is resting. And so everything has been determined as that which is good. And then all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere, comes this additional story, this additional Adam that is conflated with the original creation. And so this is very odd because everything else is founded upon this second Genesis. And the first Genesis, that first creation of an Adam, is not mentioned really again. And so what we have with this second Genesis is a second Adam that is created. This particular Adam, however, doesn't have that language about being created in the image of the Elohah. Okay, so this one is created in a different way. The other creation appears to be, truly sort of supernatural. And then the creation of the animals, even, they are coming out of the earth. Now, the way the second Adam is often presented is as if the second Adam is coming out of the earth. But there is a different word that's used. And so therefore, there's a little bit more clarity about where this other Adam is actually coming from with respect to the etymology of this other word that's used for the creation of this other Adam. So again, what we see with respect to the second Adam is that the second Adam is serving as a replacement for the first Adam. And so again, here we have these narratives about the first being put aside for the second. Okay, and so we see this with the first Genesis and the second Genesis, the first Adam and the second Adam. And so this is a pattern that started off clearly very early on. And what's also noteworthy is that the second Adam is not only associated with Yahweh or Jehovah or Yehuda, the second Adam is associated with another entity, one in which we cover quite a bit. And who might that be? Of course, it's Set. Okay, and so this might be a part of why there is so much focus on Set in these narratives. So not only do we have the second Adam replacing the first Adam in terms of these narratives, of course that's related to Set, but we also have this dynamic wherein the substance that was used to create this second Adam is synonymous with what is sometimes understood as the substance associated with Set. And so, again, there is a lot of conflation, creating quite a bit of confusion, by the way, with respect to this first and second Adam and the relationship between the atoms and the earth. And so, one is to subdue the earth, and the other Adam is supposed to be related to the earth in a different way. One way is to cultivate the ground. And so the other Adam is supposed to work. The other Adam is not in dominion. The second Adam is not a reigning Adam. And this is before the fall narrative, which is interesting. And so even before there's the fall narrative, where that Adam is cursed with respect to the earth, the ground, even before then, this Adam was presented as this wee Adam. Okay? And not only we Adam or the Adam, we also have this dynamic of cultivating. And at first, when you see cultivating, it might not occur to you that ABAD is the word that is used to communicate cultivate. And by using that at 5647, we have a very specific meaning related to the role of this Adam. And so, again, the first Adam is one with dominion, rulership, reigning. The second Adam, however, is an Adam associated with cultivation. But we're going to look at specifically what this cultivating means. And you might have already been aware of the fact that abad or avad is another way of saying slave. Okay, so at 5647, this second Adam is an Adam that is created to work, to serve, to labor, to worship. It means to enslave. You can see in there talking about tilling the ground. And so you see till, you see work, you see serve. And here, very specifically, you see keep in bondage. This is a very different Adam. This is a very different Adam, okay? To be a bond man, bond service, compelled, do, dress. If you recall, there is the dressing of the garden. To work, again, to keep in bondage, to be compelled, a husbandman. Okay? to be wrought, to work, transgress, and specifically set a. Okay. And so this particular Adam, this second Adam in Genesis 2, is not an Adam of dominion. Right at the very beginning, you don't have an Adam that is about dominion. This particular Adam is about being subjugated. And here with these translations, you can see this Adam or Adam at the base. It is essentially person. It could also mean man or individual or human being, mankind, humanity. And there are various transliterations. And so you might see La Adam or La or Le Adam, Adam over and over again, V Adam, Hey Adam. And so there are various ways that you might actually see this, but essentially what we have is person. But quite frankly, we have two types of entities that are going on here. And so here, going back to Genesis 1, we see that this entity that is creating, if you will, the first Adam is the entity with the L, and L is another way of saying the. Okay, and so the said, let us make this Adam in our image. But of course, we've gone over this before, and it doesn't exactly say what it looks like it's saying here. But the essence of what we are dealing with here is that this is a particular deity, and this deity is this El, Eloah, Elohim. This is this deity. In the second Genesis, this Yahweh presents and creates this servant or this slave, Adam. And so El creates this reigning, this elevated sort of Adam. And then Yahweh creates this slave entity. And Yahweh is also the entity that creates this tree and this garden. And so there are two narratives going on here, and they are not completely parallel narratives. And you see this the construct over and over again in the first Genesis. In fact, this is the only entity you see in Genesis 1 is this El, this the entity, this Ani sort of entity. And so that's all we are seeing in Genesis 1. It is Yahweh or Jehovah that appears in Genesis 2 with the other creation narrative. And so with this El, Eloah deity, we see this entity creating Adam, both male and female, referring to these entities as them. They appear to be created simultaneously. There is nothing in the narrative that suggests that one is coming out of the other. It appears that there are multiple entities with respect to this Adam, this original Adam, whereas in the second narrative, there's one specific Adam, and that Adam is to be a servant or a slave, a worker. And there is this very interesting birthing narrative wherein in that narrative, the male and female are not existing simultaneously. Instead, the male is basically giving birth to the female. And so El or Eloah, Elohim, has one way of creation, and then Yahweh or Jehovah or Yehuda has another type of creation. Another thing that stands out is that these two atoms have different nutrition dynamics going on. And so the first Adam that was created for rulership, that Adam is apparently a vegan. And so this Adam was created and was given herb bearing seed. In other words, fruit. Okay. And so this particular Adam was to eat fruit from trees, anything that was yielding seed, and that was to be the meat or the food for this Adam. And so there is nothing about eating an animal in this particular narrative, this particular creation narrative. There is no eating of animals, there is no destroying of animals. There is food provided for the animals, which is also green material from the earth. And so these entities were to consume food from the earth. There's nothing in the narrative about them consuming each other. However, with the second Adam, eventually what comes about is the destroying of actual animals and the consumption of animals. And so, again, these are really different entities that we are looking at here. And here you can see the clarification at Genesis 1:30. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And so the animals, including the Adam, were to consume greenery. They were to consume the food that was coming up out of the earth. Again, there's nothing in the narrative about them destroying or consuming each other, and this varies from the narratives that continue on from the second Adam. And so here we are in Genesis 2. And in Genesis 2, we see that this Adam narrative, this creation narrative, takes a few odd turns. And so, with respect to this part of the narrative, the second origin story, the second Genesis story, we see the introduction of Yahweh or Jehovah or Jehovah or Yehuda. So we see the introduction of this entity, but this entity is somehow coupled with the El entity. Now, these are technically not the same deities, but we see this conflation here where we see that this Yahweh God formed man. And interestingly, it's also referring to Hey Adam with respect to this particular translation. But this particular Hey Adam that is coming from Yahweh is created from something very specific. And this is where this creation narrative starts to incorporate elements of the Set narrative. And so this is before Adam even has a son named Set or Seth. We see the introduction of this. It's not even symbolism because it's a part of the essence of Set. When deconstructing this name Set, we see this same idea going on. So with respect to this Adam is not necessarily created in the image of this Yahweh or this Elohim. This particular Adam or Adam or Hey Adam is created out of an interesting substance. Initially, it's presented as Adam coming from the dirt or the dust of the ground. And so many individuals, when looking at that, will think that it's just generally what you see when you see dirt outside or you see the earth outside. However, this particular dust from the ground is referring technically to dirt, and that's what's actually translating. It's not translating as dust, it's actually translating as dirt. And then when you look at the meaning of dirt, the etymology of dirt, what we have is not earth, because again, when talking about the creation of the animals, we have the word for earth. However, we don't have this Adam coming from the earth. What we have here is this Adam coming from soil. Now, one might think that soil is referring to earth, but in this particular instance, this dirt, this soil is referring to or growing out of or translating as excrement, waste. And so this particular Adam that has been constructed for slavery, bondage, servitude is also being presented as an entity that is comprised of, that is birthed out of excrement. And you see this word, affair, that suggests that it's referring to the affair in 665 and 666. However, this is a slightly different affair, and it is at Strong's 6083. And this is where that reference to excrement is coming from. Now, what's noteworthy about this, again, is that when deconstructing Set, if you recall, it was noted that the other word for Set is the same word as excrement, okay? And so with respect to that, we have this second Adam essentially being synonymous with Set. And again, this is before Set was born from Adam. And here we see this afar, situated in Strong's in the Hebrew at 6083. And we see something that looks very similar to what we see in 665. And so we see dust and ashes and earth and ground and powder. And so traditionally, what we have been told is that this is about the dust from the ground. And so if you put your hand on the ground, you would be able to touch this dust. However, with respect to the translation, what is coming up is dirt. And when deconstructing dirt, some other interesting dynamics came up with respect to dirt. And so it's not just presenting as this dust of the ground, it is presenting as something else. And you see a little bit of that in this particular Strong's entry. And so you see ashes, dust, earth, ground, mortar, powder, and then you get to rubbish. And here you see indications of this again with respect to debris and rubbish again. Now, when doing the translation, what's coming up is not only dirt, but a Yiddish translation. And of course, again, that always stands out when you see a Yiddish translation coming out of Strong's Concordance. There are questions about why this is coming out as Yiddish versus coming out as Hebrew. And so we don't just see dust in general, we see this idea of dirt. And when looking at the definitions of dirt, when looking at the etymology of this dirt word, we see that it is relating to excrement. What's also noteworthy is that this is supposed to be not the ground, and so not made from the ground, but made from the dust of the ground or the dirt of the ground. And ground itself has another word attached to it. And so it is the dust basically of the ground, which is Adamah, which is Hey Adamah. In other words, this is the dust from Adam, or the dirt from Adam, or the excrement from Adam. And with respect to this, this is that Hey Adamah. And so the earth or the ground is actually a feminine construct. And so this is just a very interesting and very odd transliteration and translation dynamic with respect to this dust and dirt and Adamah, and where this second Adam is supposed to be coming from. And so the second Adam is coming from Adam. It's very odd. And here you can see in the Oxford Languages this etymology and meaning of this word dirt. And so it's coming from the Old Norse, meaning excrement. Middle English from Old Norse, drit, or excrement. It goes on to indicate, in terms of similarity, a substance such as mud or dust that soils someone or something. Okay, and so in general, that sounds like what you get on the ground. But it goes into some other dynamics with respect to what is similar, including things like soot and filth and slime and scum and pollution and waste. And so there are a number of dynamics going on here with respect to what is being insinuated about this second Adam, who is presented as this subjugated entity. And here you see the same dynamic with respect to Merriam-Webster. It indicates dirt is excrement, something that is filthy or soiling, also a contemptible person. Then it goes on in the middle, number 2, to indicate this loose or packed soil or sand, earth. And so that's what most people would be thinking about when they would be thinking about, generally speaking, this particular passage that we've been looking at. They would be thinking of something that's coming from the earth. However, when we see this translation, it is suggesting a number of things. And this also goes along with the narrative and the image that is presented related to this second Adam. And also it's tying this second Adam to this dynamic of Set, which of course is related to this idea of soil and excrement. Now, there are a number of correlations that are going along with these two creation narratives. And some of them are related to this name, Adam, or this construct of a dome, including Edom. But we see another construct that is tied to or correlating with this dome, and it is ATUM. Or TEMU. With respect to the ATUM, this is just another transliteration in many ways of a dome, because basically the T and the D can be interchanged. And also it's noteworthy that this could also technically be a transliteration dynamic related to Aten. Okay, and so the M on the N could be interchanged with the N. And then there is this TEMU. What's noteworthy is that the narrative about this ATUM deity is about self-creation. And so a deity that creates self. And so again, if anyone has any insight into the relationship between this Adom and this Atum that also appears to be related to Atom and a few other constructs. And so there are some really interesting correlations going along with this, but we can only cover so much with this extremely deep topic, and it's also controversial. So this is going to wrap up this portion of our discussion of the two atoms or the two Adoms. Also remember that Adam and Adom are associated with Edom, okay? And so we have Edom or Esau also tied into this particular narrative that we are looking at. And so again, it's a very deep topic, and so we're not going to go that deep with this initial discussion. We have gone deep enough in terms of what's going on with these two creation narratives. Now, individuals might refute that there are two creation narratives, and what I would like to see would be an exegesis of this refuting. And so if someone does not see two creation narratives in these narratives, definitely, put that forward, but also demonstrate why you are not seeing two creation narratives. If you know a little bit more about these two creation narratives, you can also, of course, share that. If you have some additional questions, additional insights, reflections, that would be great. This is a very significant topic. And so if there are also individuals that you know of that have some insight on this particular issue, definitely share this with them, and perhaps they can respond with additional insights. Because again, this two atom narrative, it has all sorts of problems associated with it. The narrative is problematic, or the narratives are problematic, and there are also all sorts of implications growing out of these particular dual narratives. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.